Good evening and welcome to the San Bruno City Council special meeting of July the 23rd, 2024. The meeting has been called to order. Roll call, please, of Council and then Planning Commission.
Councilmember Alvarez?
Here.
Councilmember Hamilton?
Here.
Councilmember Marty Medina?
Here.
Vice Mayor Salazar?
Here.
Mayor Rigo Medina.
Here.
And for the Planning Commission, Commissioner Harmon?
Here.
Commissioner Johnson? Commissioner Kuhn?
Present.
Commissioner Ledeen?
Here.
Commissioner Madden?
Here.
Vice Chair Biazotti?
Here.
And Chair Durazo is on an excused absence.
Thank you very much. We'll move into item 3, study session.
Item A, conduct a joint City Council Planning Commission study session on a 5-year long-range planning strategy.
Thank you. Before we turn it over to staff, I want to welcome the Planning Commission. It's good to get together. We've done that more and more, and I think that that is positive, and we're all working on this together. And so put all these good heads together, we will have success. With that, Director.
Can we get the slides, please? Mr. Mayor, members of the Council, and Planning Commission, we are here to talk about a 5-year long-range planning strategy. The agenda for tonight is a staff presentation, public comment if there is any, then to have Q&A with the Commission and Council, and then to have conclude with discussion from the Council and the Commission. The objective is to receive Council and Commission support for the strategy, and as a side note, to complete the item in about half an hour, because we have another item after this, which of the two, this should be the shorter one. So we're going to try to do that. First on background, what's the need for a 5-year long-range planning strategy? It's not required by any law or anything like that, but basically we do have a lot of long-range planning needs at the same time. We have our state housing mandates, which most of which are going to be in our housing element. And we also know that our local policies on development, particularly our zoning regulations, play a key role in whether a property owner or developer chooses to invest in their property. Whether they choose to invest plays a key role in our tax base. And so it's a part of our long-term fiscal sustainability. And in the near term, we are not seeing the results that we would have desired. The transit corridor plan, for example, was adopted in 2013. There hasn't been the volume of development that was anticipated. And as we look at both the housing laws and our laws about other types of development, and you forecast out the process by which to modify those, you end up pretty much at the same point, and that is ordinance number 1284, which adds a major step to both the Planning Commission and the Council's role in making policy. So what is ordinance number 1284? It's an ordinance passed in 1977 that for the most part limits structures in height and limits the number of units or the density on residentially zoned properties. There's also aspects about above ground parking structures in there as well. Over time, 5 times to be precise, there has been a ballot measure where the public did vote in support of allowing one or more areas to have either greater heights or greater densities or parking structures. That's happened for the Tan Fran Mall, also for the crossings at Bay Hill, and for the TCP. So this concept of a 5-year planning strategy is really about how to address our housing and development policies, knowing that certain things are going to have to go to a public vote. Starting out on the housing side, because that's effectively mandated by the state, We do have our housing element readoption scheduled to go to Planning Commission on the 6th of August. And then, if all goes well, come to the council on the 27th of August. One of the state's priorities for cities is to find ways for more units to be preserved and produced in existing neighborhoods. And as such, we have had to commit in our housing element to a program to expand opportunities for homeowners through a variety of options. It could be allowing more ADUs than even allowed by state law. It could be allowing certain type of lot splits that are allow more than what is currently allowed in state law. Even allowing existing non-conforming units, a site that might have a legally built fiveplex, but the zoning only allows it to have 2 units, making a way to make that legalized so those units stay and are preserved in the neighborhood. Well, all of those would trigger a vote. All of those would result in having to go to the public and have a ballot measure. So, whereas normally it would just be a case of the Planning Commission and Council talking about those types of issues, making a determination of which ones are appropriate for San Bruno, amending our general plan and our zoning accordingly, we would have to add the step of going to the ballot, and in the housing element, we're committing to do that for the housing element issues in 2028. At the same time, we'll be proceeding on what, for lack of a better term, I'm calling the economic development strategy. That's already started off because council has identified a priority of a financial feasibility assessment of the TCP. That was a priority. Funding was appropriated in the budget. An RFP has already been published, and we should have a consultant on board by the end of September. One part of the assessment will answer the question of how much does the city need to allow on a typical mixed-use property for that owner to be able to afford and want to redevelop it. At this point, based on the fact that we're not seeing a lot of development, we would assume that we don't allow enough. But the assessment would have economic expert analyze it and determine, do our rules allow enough? And if they don't, what should they allow in order to make projects more financially feasible? Then there will be the question where the Planning Commission and Council will ask, does what the assessment says we should consider fit with San Bruno? For example, if it says the only way that this is going to work is if we allow projects that are just not in keeping with the community, then we may not go there. But if the assessment says that certain areas that currently only allow 3 stories, we need to allow 5, or certain areas that allow 5, maybe we need to allow 6, we can then come back to the Commission and Council and make the assessment of whether or not you want to make those type of land use changes. Those will also require amendments to our general plan and likely a new EIR. And if heights are part of the equation, then that would need to have a ballot measure as well. Now, with both of these happening at the same time, too far. Both of these happening at the same time, we have 2 separate tasks that are likely leading to the same spot, and that is a ballot measure in 2028. The recommendation is that we combine the efforts, particularly have 1 set of general plan amendments, have 1 environmental document, not 2. But for the most part, they will still be analyzed in a separate in a separate manner, but some of the documents will be able to be done at the same time. And those are just two of the major planning initiatives on the horizon. So the top two are in bold. Those are the ones that are being talked about that will likely need to have a 2028 ballot measure. But other tasks like the climate action plan, like the safety element, like the MTCTOC policy, which is the next item, even the TANFRAN development, and then the housing element implementation, other implementation measures in the housing element, of which there are quite a few. All of that is still going to take a lot of work, both for the Planning Commission and for city staff. Just as a note, the darker shade of red indicates a fiscal year where staff believes there will be a heavy amount of work on that subject. And the lighter shade is still going to be some amount of work, but not expected to be as heavy. So for this fiscal year we're in, it's kind of a year where we will build up. We will get started on a lot of these, but some of them won't be at, we won't be going at full capacity on, but that is going to build up. Now, the policy work also, while not in the staff report, I included a line for annual municipal annual cleanup to the codes, which is something that the department wants to do on an annual basis to find opportunities to address minor things that we can clean up. So while most of the things on this list are very big, large type of policy issues that affect the whole city, we still do have the capacity to do some of these more smaller type of tasks. Now, the good news is that with the council adoption of the changes to the planning hearing process and the council adoption of the fee schedule, we do have both a funding mechanism and more capacity at the Planning Commission and staff that we do believe we can do all these things without impacting the general fund. We do expect that most of these will still have the need to bring on consultants, but there will still be staff oversight of each project in order to make sure the end result works in our city. So that then brings us to the conclusion with some closing thoughts. This 5-year strategy is like a roadmap. And in hindsight, I wish I used that in the report. It identifies the direction we're going, but it doesn't completely lay out every stop along the way. We do know that there's major milestones like in 2028. Major players obviously is council, Planning Commission, and staff. Also will be relying on consultants, and there will be a lot of engagement with the community on many of these topics. For the most part, while there may be interest in talking about what some of those details might be on the policies, this agenda item is really just to talk about the roadmap and whether or not there is agreement that the things on the list should be on the list, and if there's any type of input to staff to changes in the order or the prioritization. With that, we do recommend we go to public comment before we go to Q&A, if there is public comment.
I have no speaker cards.
Okay, thank you.
So we can go to Q&A now.
Okay. So I think you've got an overview from the director about it's not getting into, it's the roadmap, right? And these should be, whether they be on the list or not, but not in the intricate details of it. So let's start with the commission first and see if there's any questions or comments at this time. Mr. Madden.
Yeah, just a question on the ballot measure. It seems like a long time to wait. Given that it's probably going to be pretty, using the example you had about raising the building height limits, for example, it's probably going to be an uphill fight with a lot of voters. Is that something that could be accelerated up in the process so you know what the answer is before you spend all this time hoping that it gets approved and you develop your strategy around that? It would seem like the consultant that you bring on could maybe make that determination fairly early in the process. Is that an option that you could see happening?
The way our ordinance is written, it implies that the CEQA analysis of whatever the ballot measure is proposing is provided at town hall meetings prior to. And so we don't think that is possible as it's written, and it looks like in the past instances that we have done this, it's been more of the go to the ballot with something more precise. The other aspect of the proposal on the timeframes is while we go out and get an assessment of what may be necessary in order to have projects happen, and we have engagement on that. The hope is that we would start to build some support, that it's not just a case of, oh, let's go do this. There's a clear reasoning for it. There's multiple meetings at both Planning Commission and Council that eventually lead up to, because of all of this information, we are proposing this on the ballot. But I will admit, if the code we had now didn't give that implication about the CEQA needing to be done, we might be asking that question of, is it possible to go out with something not as laid out?
I think the reality you're looking at is, say you do that in 2028, developers are going to wait, number one. Number two, if they do decide, if it passes and then they go ahead, 2-3 years designing, 2-3 years building, you're looking at 9-10 years before anything's actually usable. So I would, encourage you, if there's a creative way to get it voted on sooner, that might help a lot. Just a thought.
Sorry. Question coming. Ours.
So I have a few items I'd like to address. One is that the ballot measure that was passed in support of the transit corridor plan said that we could do up to 5 stories throughout the entire TCP area. And when we passed our actual zoning ordinance, we didn't use all that capacity, I don't think. We said only 4 stories for some of it. And it seems like that is a relatively quick fix that we could go back and just max out the capacity that the voters authorized. So that I sort of wonder why that is not on our agenda already. Second point, have we looked into invoking Senate Bill 10 of 2021? I don't know if everyone's familiar with that. Where council and staff in good faith believe that something, a provision of a city charter or a voter-approved ordinance interferes with meeting the state RENA goals, it allows you to do certain types of rezoning. I don't think it lets you raise height limits. I'm not a lawyer. It definitely lets you raise densities. So the example of legalizing a 5-plex, you absolutely would be able to simply use SB 10 to rezone that up to a maximum of, I believe, 10 dwelling units per acre is the cap on it. And potentially, if you did use that to densify certain areas, then you might have enough density that you can go up to the 3 stories, and then you're talking about enough units to start applying density bonuses and things. And so that potentially would let you get around the height limit as well. So if we haven't at least investigated that as an option, we probably should do our homework on it to see whether that's a way that we can, I think you probably want to go to the ballot first, but if having it as a backup option so that we don't just completely fail RENA and lose control of our housing policy entirely, which, is pretty much what's happened to San Francisco now. And then lastly, I had a more kind of specific area, just, reading through the document, page 13 on the policies, we have SROs crossed out because there are no SROs in San Bruno. And I feel like SROs have kind of a bad reputation, but in our parents' generation, it was pretty normal for for people to move to the city. They'd stay at like a YMCA, YWCA in kind of a dorm situation, and they get their first job. And, you know, it wasn't luxurious, but you did that for 2 or 3 years, and then you moved up. And having that kind of as a transitional situation for people. There are some now kind of adult dorms in San Francisco. I have a friend who works in the tech sector who lived in basically a dorm in the Mission for about 4 years, and you know, now she's married and owns a townhouse and has a kid. You know, but you know, like you can aspire to something that's more, you know, the classic American dream, and that doesn't mean you don't need cheaper, less luxurious options along the way. And it seems like if you had something like that in the vicinity of the BART or Caltrain, that it would find renters. So I wondered whether we want to actually talk about, you know, making sure that that's legal in San Bruno at least, so if somebody did want to build one, they can.
Any comments, staff?
Yes, yes. Those are all great points. Unfortunately, we have gone down all those avenues. The ballot measure for the housing program, it's not needed to meet RENA, so we can't use the law that is necessary. We have enough sites. This is something the state wanted in addition to meeting our RENA to put more opportunities for units into neighborhoods. The SROs is a subject line in the next agenda item, but there's a housing element program where we will have to look at those, and I believe we will have to adopt regulations that do allow them. So that's already on the table. When it comes to looking at an incremental step of maxing out what may have been allowed and not used, we know we're not seeing major interest in development for the sites that we did max out. Therefore, we don't believe it will do much to then take an area that was maybe only brought up to 4 and allow it to go to 5, because the areas that do allow 5, where the only projects that are happening are the all affordable projects. And so there's that aspect. The other big part of the TCP assessment is state law gives all of these workarounds for housing to exceed our rules, but not for non-residential. So if 6-story apartment building is able to be moved in, if somebody wanted to do a 6-story hotel, there's no mechanism unless we go through and make the rules allow it. And clearly a hotel provides a lot of revenue. So all of the points made are very good. I can say that the housing element commits the city to allowing almost everything that can be allowed over the 8-year period. Even with that, we see that, well, we had to commit to get HCD's acceptance to a ballot measure in 2028 for these additional housing opportunities. HCD wanted it sooner as well, but our pushback was a combination of there is more turnout on the presidential elections, so we think there'll be a greater chance of these types of measures being able to move forward. And there's going to be a lot of work necessary to develop the policies, do the environmental review for these type of changes. If we try to get that done by 2026, I don't think we could do it all. But if there's interest in getting what we can done by 2026, that is something we could look at. It means other things won't happen, though.
Other commissioners at this time? We can make a loop back around. Kelly.
Right now, while we're kind of an information gathering phase, I'm just wondering if there are any other local cities who have run into similar problems, have gone through this process maybe a little bit before us, and if there's anything we've learned from them.
Well, one key part of the TCP assessment, we're asking the consultant to get as many as many case studies of Bay Area cities that have been able to work out the funding to do the public improvements on the streets that our TCP calls for, that have been able to come up with regulations that led to a volume of projects that the city was hoping for. So do we have the answers now? No, but that is a key part of what we are asking the consultant to go out and find for us.
Thank you.
Councilmember Hamilton.
So thank you for the report. As we looking at the combined 5-year strategy, when we talk about doing the transit corridor plan assessment, the TCP assessment, and I understand that we're doing two parallel efforts, one that's on the TCP and one that's kind of more citywide. But I just want to, we will be able to leverage the work that we do in one for the other. I want to make sure that we're not, having to spend a lot of parallel work that leads to the same thing. So I guess a better way of saying it is, when we're asking particular questions about how we can make improvements in the transit corridor, can we ask those same questions, in other areas of the city? And a follow-on question for that would be, so you can answer them together, would be when we do the assessment of the transit corridor plan, I know we talk about the height and density and other things. Can we also talk about the borders of it? If we wanted to extend it up Sneath or do whatever, is that on the table for the assessment as well?
So the strategy would allow all of that to happen if that was the desire. So most of the questions being asked of the consultant, most of the prompts in the RFP to the consultant ask for them to provide information for us that could be applied outside the TCP, really could be applied to any parcel that allows a mixed use. And once we get that assessment, the expectation is whatever ballpark numbers that gives us, we can use to inform other areas that we might want to look at its future development, including possibly extending, the TCP rules for more of El Camino. There's the town center area. At some point, there is a lot of potential there. So then when we go from the assessment to building into what land use amendments we want to make in the general plan, those same approaches can be applied geographically anywhere in the city. So it could be applied to other shopping centers, other corridors as well.
Great, thank you.
Other colleagues at this time? Okay, if not, I apologize. Second bite.
I actually want to return to the SB 10 point. You were saying, we found enough sites. And this has been something I have harped on over the last year or so. It kind of seems like, in fact, HCD is going to allow inventories that are kind of sketchy. And it feels like it's a question of whether you want to take advantage of that to get an inventory accepted, get a housing element accepted, or whether you want to take seriously we are going to try to project how much is actually going to be built. Because when it comes to things like SB 35, or there's the newer bill that is even more draconian in terms of taking away local control if you're not hitting RETA numbers, it's the actual delivered amount. Projecting the sites is one thing, and if you pick a bunch of sites and then they don't get built on and you don't hit your numbers, there are now consequences. And the HCD guidance says that you should be doing probability of development calculations and figuring out capacity. You should be providing justifications for why occupied sites would turn over, which, I found many of the descriptions in there. It's like, yes, this is a good site. You haven't explained why it's going to turn over. And at least the couple of times I've asked people in sites that were on the list, like, are you aware you're on the list? They were like, oh, no. And maybe we sent them a letter, but, so I know the San Bruno Pet Hospital has always been the example I use because it was the original one that caught my eye. Like, their business manager had no idea they were on the list when I asked her. And so I think a more realistic assessment of that inventory would not, in fact, show us hitting that number. And it's a question of whether, if you want to be honest about that, then you can invoke SB 10 and say we would need to look more places. And so, anyway.
Anything you want to conclude with this topic?
If possible, I'd like to provide as much of a response
Sure.
at that point. There's no question that the January 2023 version of the housing element did not provide enough justifications on the sites. That was a HCD comment. The revised one provides much more, but the sites are pretty much still the same. We are also providing a buffer. We also have a program where midstream we will add more sites to the inventory. There's the no net loss requirement that if a site that we thought's going to be housing comes off the list because something else non-housing happens, we have to deal with that. And then on the case of owners not knowing, we have a program commitment that on an annual basis we'll be having outreach with all the owners of the site's inventory, not a letter, but like a meeting now. We can't make them attend, but actually engage them, meeting with developers, letting them know about the sites and the projects and opportunities. So I can still say we are doing, we are addressing everything in the areas we can. I will guarantee you that the units that are built will not mirror what's in our site inventory. I do think we may be able to build the units that we need. Some of them will happen on sites we didn't think would happen, or that we couldn't justify to the state that it was going to happen. So I still think we're back at that point where if we meet the state's high thresholds, it becomes difficult to then go in and use that particular law. Having said that, as the Planning Commission sees the programs that we have committed to and it eventually comes to council, I think you're going to see we are going to be doing a lot. In closure on this, absent interest in trying to take an accelerated piece of this that won't be able to do as much because we'll have less time to do it, absent hearing anything about that in particular, the intent is to move forward with the strategy as laid out.
So that's, we can nod, but what the director is wanting to make sure is what he just articulated, his last statement is accurate. Is there anybody that disagrees? Okay, there you go. All right, with that, let's move on to item B.
Item B, conduct a joint City Council Planning Commission study session on the Metropolitan Transportation Commission Transit-Oriented Communities Policy.
Director.
If we could get the other slideshow up. So this item is in some ways under the umbrella of the prior. The prior one talked about a wide range of long-range initiatives. This is one of them. And the slides are coming up. I can see it. So as with the other one, we're going to have a staff presentation, go into public comment, if any, and then into Q&A and discussion. So the objective would be for me to deliver an overview of the MTC TOC policy and a proposed path forward to compliance, and to receive receive direction on whether the city wants to pursue policy compliance, and if so, whether the proposed path is the supported path. So for background, the MTC is the Bay Area Agency for Transportation Planning and Financing and Coordination. The MTC and ABAG adopted the Plan Bay Area 2050, which is our regional transportation plan and sustainable community strategy. It covers transportation, housing, the environment, and the economy, because they are all interrelated. Then the MTC adopted the Transit-Oriented Communities, or the TOC policy, to implement Plan Bay Area. Compliance with the TOC policy is voluntary, and I put that in quotes, and I'll explain that later. The MTC receives transportation funds from the federal government and has a guide on how to distribute those funds to local agencies through the One Bay Area Grant, or OBAG. In past cycles, we in San Bruno have received some OBAG funding, and we have some photos of those projects. But future OBAG cycles, in a nutshell, will be prioritized for cities that meet the TOC policy. So if we want access to that transportation funding, we need to adopt ordinances and regulations that comply with the TOC policy. You're not expected to see this in detail. This is a map of the region. The little circles are the half-mile radiuses around a number of transit stations. I'm hoping the screens come back. So the arrow points to where we are, a small subset of the whole area. This also the color of the circles tie into what level of transit station it is. And at Tier 1, that's the station that has incredible amounts of traffic. That's like in San Francisco, in their downtown area. Tier 4 would be the lowest one. It might just have, well, it has the lowest amount of service. Our two stations are Tier 2 and Tier 3. Our BART station is at the higher level. Our Caltrain station is at the lower level. Let me see what I can do without the slides. So the half-mile radius around the BART station, there's certain types of regulations we have to impose. Half-mile radius around Caltrain station, there's certain types of regulations we have to impose. The ones near the BART station are more challenging because it's a higher level of transit, so they want the cities to be more aggressive in the land use policies. I'm going to skip ahead. If I get the screen back, I'll show you the past projects and the future projects that have used OBAG. But in a nutshell, we have had a number of projects along our streets, our sidewalks, our projects with bike paths that we have gotten about $3 million in OBAG funding. If we were able to apply for OBAG funding in the future, we have transportation projects, including the next segment of the bike path, some improvements along San Bruno Avenue in the transit corridor, the grade separation at Scott Street, bicycle boulevards on Elm and Linden, and safe routes to school improvements, all of which we plan we would plan to apply for if we were eligible. Because of the size of these projects, the cost of some of these projects, see, I think I'm able to, okay, so let me jump back. So here's a slide of projects that we have gotten funding and have used. Okay. Going back to the future needs, the expectation is, because some of these projects are so large, if we are awarded OBAG for these projects, it could be in the tens of millions, whereas in the past it was a lower amount. That's simply because things like the grade separation at Scott Street is going to be a huge dollar amount. And thus, if we got funding, it would rise to a larger level. So in general, we believe future OBAG funding will be more significant than it has been in the past. Okay. That then leads into the fundamental question of this session is the potential opportunities for the funding worth the perceived impact of the policies that we would have to adopt? And there are a number of categories of policies that we would have to adopt. They have to do with what the density and intensity standards around the stations would be. We would have to adopt certain types of affordable housing and anti-displacement policies. We would have to adopt parking management policies. And we would have to have a track record of improving access and circulation to our transit stations. Of the four categories, the last one is the one we're in the best shape, because our Public Works Department and Council have already been doing most of those things. So that really leaves the last three, which are really more in the realm of land use. On density and intensity standards, the changes we would have to make around the Caltrain station are not as significant as those around the BART station. In general, we think what they'd be asking us to do around the Caltrain station is acceptable. It would be to establish a minimum density of 50 units an acre. If Council and Planning Commission remember, the 111 San Bruno project, that was closer to 100 units an acre. So it's not a stretch for us to make a minimum at the level that's being asked for. We would have to set a minimum FAR for office at 2.0. That's basically at least a two-story building, if not maybe 2.5 stories. That's a little higher than is allowed on some of the sites in the TCP, but not by that much. So again, if we had to do this, it's not that far off. In the BART area, the minimum density would be 75 units an acre. Again, not a concern if the 111 San Bruno is 100. Most of the projects we're seeing in the mixed-use areas are going to meet that. But the FAR for office would have to be 3.0 FAR. That, in theory, means an owner wanting to do less than 3.0, we'd have to say no to. And an owner that might be constrained by heights, that is not able to get to 3.0, we might have issues with that. But we think there could be ways to work around that. So overall, in the scheme of things, we think that the density intensity options are workable. So the first and the fourth, we think, are pretty straightforward. The second grouping are policies that are really about housing for the most part. And there's a lot of overlap with what we already said in the housing element that we're going to do. So the list that was given to you in the staff report of the categories of each of the types of policies and the ones that staff recommends we do, for the most part, again, we're pretty comfortable with what those are. We focused on recommending policies that have no long-term, had no significant long-term staffing or commitment of dollars. We looked for things that we were already going to be doing in the housing element, and we think we've been able to do so with those type of policies. The area where we see the biggest problem is with the parking management. And that, there's a lot of sections to parking management, but it is just the maximum parking standards that we would have to set. So around the Caltrain area, Caltrain station area, we would have to have a maximum number of one space per each new housing unit. That alone doesn't sound that bad. The project that we just saw, again, 111 San Bruno, did one space per unit. But we'd have a maximum of that. So if an owner wanted to do more, we would have to say no. There's a maximum parking ratio on the commercial side that, like the residential, seems workable. Okay. I don't know. It's not, oh, it's just there? I don't know. Yeah, I'm not able to use the remote. If you could move forward to slide 22. The one thing I'd like to note, other than the pictures of the projects, the slides really just copy the tables that are in the report and add green, yellow, or red for if it seems easy, if it seems okay, or if it seems rough. And the one red one is around the BART station. So we would have to adopt maximum parking regulations that a developer within half a mile of the BART station could not do more than half a space per residential unit, and could not do more than 1.6 spaces per 1,000 square feet of non-residential. 1.6 per 1,000 is about 1 per 650. And for our retail, we generally have 1 per 300 as our minimum. Now, because of state law, we can't apply our minimums, but just for context, our minimum used to be 1 per 300. Around BART, we'd have to say the maximum is 1 per 650. So half as much parking would be the maximum that we can allow. And then on the residential side as well, it's low. The reason this is a concern is while I'm optimistic that by the end of the 2050 Plan Bay Area scope, that maybe we are less auto-dependent and we have more transit options. Thus, there is the ability to have units in the area with half a space, have housing in the area with half a space per unit, have commercial with 1 per 650. But it's going to be a while before we get there. And one could argue that putting these parking maximums in could prevent an owner or developer in a half-mile radius of BART from investing, because they already have more parking, which for a while may be necessary. So again, the one thing we're concerned about is the Tier 2 parking maximums around BART. If we could go to slide 26. So slide 26 replicates a table in the staff report. Again, the only difference is there's a color coding. We have, if council wants to do this, if council believes that the funding is worth the policy changes, we think most of the policy changes are positive or that we would already be doing. Clearly, the parking around BART, we would not be recommending. We project that we would work on these tasks in the quarters assigned above. We would have to adopt all these policies by January of 2026. And With that, I'm just going to end the presentation on this slide because I think this gives, the key information to talk about and available for any questions.
Thank you, and thank you for getting through the report in light of the slides. There are some closing thoughts, but I know that you wanted to conclude on that. Commissioners, anything at this time? Tom, and then Jared, please.
Okay. Yeah, I have some questions first, then maybe when it comes back around, I have some comments and discussion. Questions. The funding that they provide, how much % of the overall project cost would they provide?
If we are awarded the grant, I believe it is a large percentage of it. Public Works Director, if you're able to confirm that.
Like 100%, 50%?
We always have to have a match, but from the information I was given, our match is normally in the 10 to 20%, and then the rest is funded if we're awarded that project.
Through the chair, Matt Lee, Public Works Director, just confirming what Director Gillies said. It's not 100%. No grants are definitely ever that amount in those large amounts, and it's going to be dependent on the merits of the project itself. It's not a formula grant. It's actually a competitive grant, so it really depends on what you're asking for and what you're getting. Prime example is our current Huntington cycle tracks. If you looked at the PowerPoint slide as it was flickering in and out, we got about $914,000 for that project itself, and that was probably, I think, somewhere along the lines of 70 to 80% of the cost of that project. So it really depends. If you look at the intent of the OBAC grant, it's to help with certain efforts, and so as long as those metrics are hit on those projects and it provides a regional benefit, you can get larger grant amounts. So it's really just dependent on that.
Okay, so just pure math, you're saying that project was about 1.3 million and they gave us 70%, so 900,000, roughly, right?
Yes.
Okay. What's the deadline for this? And what happens if we don't meet the deadline? Is there another chance in the future?
Yeah, so the deadline for what they call OBAG 4, the fourth round of this, we would have to show compliance with these rules by January of 2026. If we don't, then the presumption is we would have to show compliance with these rules or maybe a new set of rules they make for OBAG 5.
When would OBAG 5 be?
I don't know.
Okay, so it's not like a yearly thing.
No, I believe it's multi-year.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Yeah, a couple questions. On the grade separation at Scott, is that related to the Caltrain, or is that something else?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
It's related to that.
So the city would have to pay for that, not Caltrain/TJPA for the high-speed rail? Because I know they have about 40-plus grade separations planned along the route to San Jose. The city is footing that bill for if that grade separation occurs in their town? Or is that TJPA, Caltrain?
I'll let the Public Works Director ask that.
And then
answer
one
that.
more question after that. So.
So the grade separation is not fully funded by the city. We're going to take whatever grant funds we can get, and usually it's going to come from like TJPA and other areas. The city is a lead. I do believe we have to come up with a funding plan that's going to be determined. The city's obviously partnering with a lot of agencies to make this project competitive for a variety of grants, and that's what we're looking to do.
Okay, so maybe like things like sidewalks next to it are part of the city, but the overall project would be more Caltrain, TJPA jurisdiction funding. Am I understanding right? Or
So
I guess he mentioned like $10 million for that project, I believe. So I'm just trying to figure out.
In the tens of millions.
Tens of millions.
So I'm sorry, I mean, I may have just a little bit. So like at the Broadway, that's about $300 million for that grade separation. And that's coming from state funding, that's coming from the San Mateo County Transportation Authority from Measure A, Measure W. So the project at South Linden and Scott are kind of been joint together as far as requesting. So back then I asked for funds, and so did Carol Matsumoto, to try to get some of those dollars. And so we've got Broadway, and then we would probably go north to here. But you are right, there is dozens of grade separations between its whole route.
Right, okay. All right.
And none of them are fully funded, and there's only so much in the cost. I was trying to think of what our cost was here at San Bruno's, but now they usually exceed 300.
Okay. My next question has to do with the, you mentioned the challenges due to the BART station. You had the one you had in red there. Would that impact the Tanforan plans, if that's enacted too early? And if the Tanforan project is approved before that's approved, I assume it's grandfathered in, whatever plans they have there?
Yes, and that is the strategy that staff is taking with the developer, to get them entitled before January of 2026.
Other commissioners at this time? Eros.
Yeah, I think I'm known for always pointing out that, the parking minimums are overly aggressive compared to the statistics on the El Camino corridor. This actually does, half a space per unit maximum seems lower than at least those current statistics. It is sort of surprising. I would hope that the, ABAG in doing the Plan Bay Area 2050, have they been, gathering sort of justification that, hey, here are example projects that are working with car share. I could see it working for the, the low-income housing, is that population tends to economize on having fewer cars and using more public transit and so on anyway, but for market rate, it seems pretty aggressive. I don't know what the studies are saying about how you get down to that with, getting the market rate customers to do car share, e-bikes, whatever else, how that's working.
I think it's just a case that when they came up with our criteria of what a Tier 1, a Tier 2, a Tier 3 is, the BART station that we have fell into their Tier 2. And I think if they were looking at it more fine-grained, there's arguments to make that it shouldn't be. It's a very, very suburban environment. But at this point, we are in Tier 2 in our, and this would be something that this admittedly is the only question that staff has in coming forth and giving a recommendation. Should we go for the TOC policy so we're eligible for the funding or not? In the end, we do recommend it, and part of the recommendation is that we will just try to manage the Tier 2 parking maximums to the extent we can. But council can make the call of, as long as those are what they are, we're not interested in the TOC policy. But then we aren't eligible for the funding, so it's a tough call.
Anything?
Through the chair. Would there be any way to appeal the Tier 2 assignment to this entity to perhaps make an argument that would be unique to us so that we could arrive at something that seemed more feasible?
I'm not aware, but we can look into that.
Medina, Mr. Hamilton.
Sure. Thank you very much for the report. Great questions. Tanforan was the biggest thing that I was thinking about, and it seems like we have a plan. How realistic can we get to entitlement by end of 2026 or beginning of 2026? Beginning?
We would, January 2026 is when we would have to show our commitment, and I have a level of confidence that getting the TANFRAN entitlement by the end of 2025 is feasible.
Okay, great. The next part of that is, do you share that with the MTC? Like, hey, we're going to do this kind of little deal here because what you're proposing is too strict for us, because I believe that's the parking standards that, or the parking amount that Alexandria has been talking about has been at least one parking space per unit, if I recall properly. But following up on how inflexible or how is this? Like, if it's one little thing that's going to hold this up and it's going to be pushed through hopefully sooner, then yeah, we're okay with 95% of it. So have we started those conversations? I mean, after tonight, to kind of find out from somebody over there, like, what is possible?
We have had dialogue up to this point with MTC staff. Some of the you see some of the requirements, you're offered a menu of options and you get to pick
Sure.
what fits. This is one of those that there's no menu. I think the approach of making the argument that should this really be a Tier 2 site might be the most viable, and having that conversation. Because clearly, if this were made a Tier 3 site, we're not that worried about those numbers because they are closer to what we see the market doing. So I think one of the great ideas that we're going to be taking away is looking at pathways to challenge us being in Tier 2 on that site. Because the thing for Tier 2 is that you have 2 BART lines, and they count the red and yellow, which go on the same track, the same direction, as 2 lines. That's,
Interesting.
is that really 2 lines, or?
And we also probably have the only BART station that has height limits because we have an airport that flies over, or the aircraft that take over. And so
Yeah. And we have that
one
concern
size
as
never
well.
fits all,
Yeah.
and it seems like we're facing that all the time. But thank you for your answers.
Yeah.
So I have all kinds of opinions about parking maximums, but I also have a fairly, it might even be a silly question. When we're talking about these, the rules and the parking rules and all these various things, do they only apply to multifamily housing? If I own a single-family dwelling on a single lot and I want to knock it down and put up a better one, am I now, no, you can only have a half a space? And no, if you're going to knock down your 1 unit, now you have to put up a 4-plex. How small does it get?
I believe it's going to only apply to new development, and I don't know that they would call like a new house as development.
Okay.
I know that in their instructions that they give to cities about how to calculate what your average density is, we're allowed to take the neighborhoods out. So we're not going to apply a minimum density in a neighborhood that would not fit. So
Okay.
it is possible that the same will apply from parking. I think from a staff perspective, we assumed it would not apply to single-family homes, but we will verify that.
Yeah, I'd want to verify that, because obviously that would be a poison pill for me. The whole concept of a parking maximum, we've heard it from several people and yourself. I mean, when it comes to trying to attract market rate development, putting in that type of a hamstring, I think it's going to scare developers away. And I don't know, it seems silly, and it seems, I like the idea of trying to argue the Tier 2 down to Tier 3. It's really frustrating because it's like we're trying to comply. We're trying to develop as much housing as possible. But it's almost like, okay, do we really have to discourage people from using BART in order to get rules that are fair? Nobody wants to do that. That's silly. So anyway, thank you for answering my question.
And I understand with the MTC, the staff goes with staff, but also we have representatives, Commissioner Pappen, Commissioner Canepa, and so always at a different level, we certainly can bring things forward or try to assist where we can, keeping it within the proper element of their operations. Other questions?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
And then Michael.
So I'm reading at the our 2023 to 2031 adopted policy. We had the quota of 3,165 for the housing, and just happened to stumble upon the MTC website. And with regards to the what you're planning to apply with around the half a mile BART station, which is more ideal for our situation, they are requiring us to submit 3,850 housing threshold, and that would make us higher to what we are required to provide. Are we going to be able to meet this one in 2026? Because the last survey that we had back in 2019, our housing only had 16,900, I believe. Let me go back. From what we already, in our website, the one that we already adopted. So we will have a big jump to meet this requirement from MTOC in order for us to get that grant. I'm optimistic.
Yeah.
I'm sure we will meet that, but it's a big jump.
Yeah, I'm not aware of where that 3,850 just in the half-mile radius around the BART station, what that number comes from. I will look into that. From what I've read about the TOC policy compliance, we would only have to establish a minimum density in the lands that housing's allowed, and whether that ever turns into that number of units, it's market-based, it's based on a lot of other things. I don't believe there's any requirement to actually cause the units to happen, whereas with the housing element in RENA, there are a lot more expectations that if the housing does not happen as planned, we need to step up and do other things to encourage more housing. So we'll look into that. We're still early in learning what all this means, but if there was a requirement that we produce 3,800 units around the BART station, then that would have been a red color on the
Within
table.
the half a mile
Yeah,
of the
that-
BART station.
yeah. One thing that is coming to mind is in the recommendation, the staff report, it was to basically give a green light to working towards this. The way that we've scheduled the work, very little of this policy work would happen in the next 6 months. So what I would like to amend our recommendation that taking out the parking issue, taking out the Tier 2 parking issue around BART, is their acceptance of what's being proposed. We will then go and talk to MTC, examine this more, come back in 3 months and 6 months. I'm not sure in the time frame before we really start to go too far down the line with some better answers about that particular topic. And then at that point, council can decide, yes, let's go for compliance, or no, if this is still what it sounds like it is and there's no flexibility, maybe you still do want us to do compliance, but you'll know more information at a later date.
Thank you.
So I had concerns about Tanfran as well, so I'm glad that was raised. And but say we missed a deadline, and they've already told us that they're looking at phasing their project, and so maybe they'll only come to us for approval on a portion of it, and some of it gets delayed a few years. Is there some mechanism that we would still have for granting exceptions to projects that we feel are? I know that we can, we can change some rules. We can make changes to zoning. We do it all the time. Does this commit us to going down a path that we can't ever override?
So I'm going to purposely answer this in a hypothetical. If we had a area that another agency wanted us to make rules that a potential development we were concerned about with, did not want to meet, we have avenues where we can establish new plan development zoning that it will establish what the zoning rules for that land is, even future phases that end up happening there. There's also opportunities, there's other opportunities as well. So back to the San Bruno case, the concern about Tier 2 parking, I have very little concern. My concern mostly is for the projects that might happen way down the line, like at Town Center, like some of the older office buildings on Sneath that might at some point want to redevelop that are in that radius. Because of information I am aware of, I'm not concerned about the Tanfran site.
Okay, but other future potential sites could be. And I agree. I'm hearing from a lot of people that having a cap on that is potentially going to scare away some development. And so anything that we can do, I like your new proposal of moving forward with everything else. Everything else seems pretty tame, but that parking maximum does seem like it could cause issues. Another question I had, and I'm not sure if you're going to know the answer to this, but some of the OBAG grants are administered by CCAG, and CCAG would apply for larger regional projects. They get OBAG funding. And I'm wondering if this is going to limit what cities or what projects could be applied for if, say, one city adopts it and another city doesn't. How's that going to hurt? If a South City decides that they don't want to do this, how does that affect any potential funding for our grade separation, which has been decided that would be bundled together? So just some questions around that. Maybe everyone will, whatever version of it they get, maybe they'll all be happy with it. But it does seem like there is some collaboration that needs to happen regionally to make sure that we're all moving in lockstep. Mm-hmm. And if everybody else decides they're not going to do it, then maybe it's not worth it for us to do it either.
And then for me, I think, Peter, the way you articulated the last statement, moving things forward with the exception of not the exception, but with the tier. And I think it's really for staff to go back to MTC staff, so we don't have everybody going in different directions and then we're all over the board. So really that's for staff to deal with staff at MTC from the city of San Bruno to see what you can or cannot do, bring it back, and then we'll get an update on that. But is everybody else okay with how the director said it at the end, with the exception of the tier element? Okay.
Yeah, I think for me, the main thing is if there's a snag in Tanforan, you have the ability to stop this process and delay it. I don't know if there's some cutoff time where there's no going back, but that would be my main concern, jeopardizing $1 billion project for a few, 20 million for a project that won't get built in the next 8 years. So.
Yeah, I mean, for me, like I'm generally in favor of the sort of near-term proposal. The longer-term question, I I mean, a lot of us are like, gosh, would this scare off developers? Well, maybe we should ask some developers. Like, that seems like getting more clarity on, are there workarounds for this? Are there projects we can look at as examples where we can do this successfully and feel confident in 6 months if we want to seriously talk about adopting this by January of 26? They're like, yeah, this isn't going to like hamstring us.
Yeah. So I want to take a quick pause here, kind of take a step back. Along, these and the long-range planning, everything that the state's asking us to do, that's one thing. It's layering on top of the city planning and zoning we have now. Putting ADUs in certain neighborhoods to meet goals, or taking parking out. How can I say it? It's kind of like single-family housing and on-street parking in downtown. That's like our junk food. Like, it's really bad, in fact. The city's telling us that, or I'm sorry, the state's telling us that we have to do something. That mommy's telling us that we have to eat our vegetables too. And that's how we end up with like pineapple on our pizza. It's not really what we want. I think we need to take a step back here and look at what's the real vision for the future. Is it, sprinkling, little things in between and then keep adding on as the state's telling us to do something? Or is it, taking a pause, forgetting about all of this and just like, what does the San Bruno really look like in 5, 10, 20 years? Setting that as our 5-year plan. And then I think if we do that, we just take a pause, take a step back, we'll see that we can fit everything in that we want to. We can meet all of those goals. It's probably a very different looking city, though. It's probably going to be unpopular, too. It's, for the current residents. But all of these things is going to be very unpopular. It'll just be a lot better planned if we do it the right way. I think we're doing something that's poor planning right now, just by taking stuff away and adding stuff on ad hoc. It's not good planning.
Okay, thank you for your comments. Any other comments at this time? Real quick, go ahead. Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So in three months, we'll hear back as a joint study session, or is that going to come in independently?
So the exact time, I'm not sure. I would say 3 to 6. And since this topic is such that the Planning Commission is going to be heavily involved with developing the policy to make a recommendation up to council, I think we should try to make it a joint session.
I would like to have it as one. I think that it's been very good for us to be collaborative, and let's be honest, let's save some time to have, you have a meeting, we have a meeting, and then staff has, let's do it together, right? I think everybody in a room does better than separate. So make it a joint.
And Mr. Mayor, and I just wanted to kind of piggyback on what you said. We're dealing with policies right now, but these are the policies that we're being told we have to choose from. And it's like having a little bit flexibility in like, what do we think and what is our vision for San Bruno? Because that doesn't happen very often. It's so many things are being mandated and told, you need to do this, you need to do that, parking center this, and it's like, well, what's our take on the vision for our city? And when do we have that opportunity to talk? Because in an hour and a half, it wasn't much time, right? We covered 2 big topics that had 5 to 8 different things in them. So I would like to leave my last comment with, how do we have those discussions in the future?
And I just want to remind everybody, we've been talking about Tanforan all night. The plan that we have for Tanforan was because we decided to make our own destiny and say, what would be the best thing for San Bruno in that spot? And put together the Reimagining Tanforan fact sheet and put it out nationwide to attract exactly what we asked for, basically. So I would echo the comments that we should, look at this kind of more holistically as to what we really want to envision for San Bruno, rather than, and try to stay away from a more piecemeal approach.
I want to thank the commission for being here, and I know I just volunteered you for another meeting, but hopefully you're okay with that. So with
Mr.
that,
Mayor?
Yes.
Am I allowed to make one response?
Absolutely, of course you are.
Going back to the first item on our agenda, the third step of the economic development strategy was looking at the general plan land use element that was going to be informed by aspects of the TCP assessment. But when we're looking at the general plan land use element, we don't only have to look at those aspects of it. It's an opportunity where we will be in the land use element. We'll be able to have conversations about more than just the key things, because I fully agree. There's two key things that are driving us. Both are arguably about survival. One is housing mandates, and the other is our finances. So there are certain things we have to do to address those, but we can do the greater, more holistic things while we're there as well. And so that is in the plan, or in the strategy, if you will. And so I just wanted to make that clear.
Thank you. With that, we'll go ahead and adjourn the special city council meeting, and we will adjourn into the next regular city council meeting, which will be here momentarily at 7 o'clock. Meeting adjourned. And thank you again, Commission.